Millionaire sees his ex-wife at the hospital holding their newborn. He can't believe his eyes. Victor had everything a man could want: wealth, power, success. But none of it mattered when he stood at the door of his ex-wife's apartment, knowing the child in her arms was his son, a son he had never met. How had he missed the signs? Was it too late to fix what he'd broken? As he walked into the room, holding the baby for the first time, he was forced to confront a painful truth. His life wasn't measured by the deals he closed or the luxury he enjoyed. It was about love, family, and the second chances that never come easy. Would he be able to prove to Sophia and to himself that he could change before it was too late? Victor had everything he ever dreamed of: the penthouse apartment overlooking the city skyline, a fleet of luxury cars parked outside, and a bank account that could buy nearly anything he desired. He was a millionaire, a name whispered in the corridors of business deals, a man who had clawed his way to the top, and yet, despite all of this, something gnawed at him, an emptiness he couldn't shake. Each day felt like a repetition of the last, filled with meetings, conference calls, and gala events. He'd built his empire with one singular focus: success. He believed that if he achieved enough, if he amassed enough wealth and status, he would feel complete. But lately, he couldn't escape the feeling that someone, was missing. Victor sat in his office late one evening, staring out the glass window at the twinkling lights below. The city never seemed to stop, just like him. His phone buzzed on the desk, breaking the silence. It was a text from his assistant. "The meeting with the investors is rescheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow." He sighed, his fingers hovering over the keyboard as he checked the calendar. More work. Another day of running in circles, chasing after the same fleeting goal. As he ran his hand through his dark hair, his thoughts drifted unbidden to her, Sophia. The woman who had once been his whole world. The woman whose laughter had filled their apartment with joy, whose presence had anchored him in ways he never fully appreciated. He had been so consumed by his ambitions, so focused on the deals that seemed to define his worth, that he failed to see what was slipping away right before him. The divorce came swiftly, almost unexpectedly. He had never anticipated the end of their marriage, but looking back, it was clear that it was inevitable. The long hours at the office, the dinners missed, the nights spent apart as he buried himself in the next big project. Sophia had tried to reach him, tried to pull him back from the brink, but his mind was elsewhere. The allure of success was too powerful, and in the end, it had cost him everything. Victor had tried to move on, of course. He threw himself deeper into his work, bought more properties, expanded his company. He'd dated other women, but none of them had come close to filling the space Sophia once occupied in his life. The thrill of new relationships faded quickly, leaving him more hollow than before. The truth was, nothing and no one could replace what he had lost. Not the flashy dinners, not the endless parties, not even the most luxurious vacations. Nothing compared to the quiet moments he once shared with Sophia, the late-night talks, the plans for a future they would never get to have. He shook his head as if to rid himself of the thoughts, but they lingered, persistent and intrusive. "Get a grip," he muttered to himself, standing up to pace the length of the room. "You've got everything you could ever want, so why does it feel like nothing at all?" The phone buzzed again, this time with a call. He glanced at the screen and frowned. It was his mother's hospital. He had been expecting a call from her, but he wasn't ready for this. "Hello," he answered, his voice tense. "Victor, it's your mother. I'm afraid I've had a little accident. Nothing too serious, but they want to keep me overnight for observation. I'll be fine." Victor felt his stomach drop, a surge of worry making him forget about everything else. "Mum, what happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Don't worry about me," she reassured him, her voice soft but determined. "Just come to the hospital when you can. I'll be fine, really." He promised to be there, hanging up the phone quickly, still shaken. As he grabbed his coat and left the apartment, his mind remained preoccupied with his mother. He hadn't seen her in a while, always too busy to make time. As he stepped into the elevator, he took a deep breath. Work will have to wait, he thought to himself, but the words didn't bring any comfort. You've been saying that a lot lately, a voice inside his mind added. He ignored it and focused on the road ahead, the drive to the hospital feeling longer than usual. The hospital was bustling, the sterile air filled with the distant sounds of nurses and doctors. Victor made his way through the lobby, his footsteps quickening as he approached the front desk. I'm here to see my mother, Elizabeth Porter. Is she in room 202? The receptionist nodded, handing him a visitor's pass. Right down the hall, sir. Victor thanked her, walking quickly down the corridor. The moment he reached his mother's room, he stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting by his mother's bedside, was Sophia. She looked exactly as he remembered, older, but the same serene beauty that had captivated him years ago. Her auburn hair, now slightly greying at the temples, framed her face softly. She was holding a baby in her arms, the small bundle wrapped in a pale blue blanket. Victor felt his heart skip a beat. His eyes widened, his breath catching in his throat. For a moment he didn't know how to react. He just stood there, frozen. Sophia turned her head, her eyes meeting his, and there was a brief flicker of surprise. But it quickly faded, replaced by something he couldn't quite read. Victor, she said quietly, her voice calm but distant. He couldn't tear his gaze away from the child in her arms. The small face, the tiny hands curled into fists. It all felt surreal. His mind raced. Is that my child? Sophia smiled softly, the kind of smile that carried years of history between them. This is our son, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Victor took a tentative step forward, his mind spinning. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. How had he missed this? How had he not known? The child in Sophia's arms was his, he was certain of it. But how had this all happened without him being there? I didn't know, he stammered, his words failing him. His mind scrambled for something to say, some way to explain the gaping hole in his heart that suddenly felt impossibly large. Sophia, But she interrupted him gently, a note of finality in her voice. It's okay, Victor. You weren't part of this. I understand. And just like that, everything Victor thought he knew about himself, about his life, was shattered. The world that had once been perfectly controlled, built on success and ambition, now seemed like a distant illusion. He had thought he had everything. But standing there in the sterile hospital room, looking at the child he never knew existed, Victor realized that everything he had worked for had come at an unbearable cost. As Sophia looked at him with a mixture of calm acceptance and quiet strength, Victor understood. He had lost far more than he could ever regain. But in that moment, he knew one thing for certain. He would do whatever it took to fix this. He had no idea where to begin, but he knew he couldn't walk away again. Not now. Not with this second chance staring him in the face. The journey of redemption had just begun. The room felt suffocating. The quiet hum of the hospital, the soft rustling of the sheets, and the steady beeping of the machines all combined into a kind of stillness that seemed out of place. It was a world Victor had never truly noticed before, a world that, for all his success, had always been on the periphery of his life. Now it was inescapable. Victor took a few more tentative steps into the room, his eyes never leaving the baby, his son. His heart raced with a mixture of confusion, guilt, and an overwhelming need to connect, to understand what had happened. How had he been so blind? How had he let this moment slip away? Sophia was still sitting there, her gaze steady, unflinching. She wasn't angry, but the distance between them was palpable. The years of silence stretched between them like a vast ocean, impossible to cross in a single breath. "His name is Nicholas," Sophia said, her voice soft but clear. She didn't look at Victor when she spoke. Instead, her focus remained on the baby in her arms, her hands cradling him with the kind of care that only a mother could give. Victor swallowed hard, his mouth dry. "Nicholas," he repeated, the name unfamiliar, yet somehow deeply personal. The sound of it settled into his chest, heavy and real. He wanted to reach out, to touch the baby, but his hands felt too large, too clumsy. He didn't know how to bridge the gap that separated him from this moment, from this child who was his own flesh and blood. Sophia sighed, a soft exhale that seemed to carry the weight of years. "I never wanted this to be how you found out. But I couldn't keep this secret from you forever, Victor." She looked up at him finally, her eyes searching his face, as if trying to gauge whether he would leave again. Victor shifted uneasily, unsure of how to respond. What could he say? What words could possibly make up for the absence he had been in for so long? His mind kept returning to the same thought. I missed it. I missed everything. The silence between them stretched, awkward and uncomfortable. Victor's gaze flickered to the baby once again. He had imagined this moment, if he had ever allowed himself to imagine it at all, in a different light. He had thought that one day, when the time was right, they would come together, reconcile, and share a life again. He'd imagined a reunion, full of apologies and laughter, maybe even a little bit of hope for the future. But this felt like something far more permanent, far more final. Sophia's expression softened, as if sensing his turmoil. She shifted slightly in her seat, careful not to disturb the baby. "I never wanted to do this alone, Victor," she said quietly, the pain of her words hanging in the air between them. "But you weren't there. You chose your work, your success over everything else. Over us." Victor flinched, as though she had struck him. Her words cut deeper than any sharp retort ever could. He had never understood the full extent of her hurt, never fully grasped how his neglect had chipped away at their marriage until there was nothing left but the empty space between them. The silence that filled their home had been his fault, and the guilt that washed over him now was suffocating. "I didn't know," he whispered, the words barely escaping his lips. "I didn't know how badly I was failing you." Sophia's gaze softened, but there was still a flicker of pain in her eyes. "You didn't see it, Victor. You didn't see how much I needed you. And now, look at this. We're both here, and you're meeting your son for the first time in a hospital room. After everything." Victor's chest tightened at her words. He wanted to say something to make it right, to fix the years of mistakes, but nothing he could say seemed enough. The damage was done, and no amount of wealth or success could undo the hurt he had caused. Sophia's voice broke through his thoughts again, this time softer, more resigned. "I'm not angry anymore, Victor. I was, yes, for a long time, but that's not what matters now." She looked down at Nicholas, her fingers brushing his tiny hand gently. "What matters now is that he has you. Whether you choose to be part of his life or not, he needs you." Victor's throat tightened as he looked at the baby, his son, a child he had no part in raising, no part in knowing until now. He felt both connected and disconnected at once, a parent, yet a stranger. The weight of the responsibility pressed down on him, and he couldn't breathe properly. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, the words escaping before he could stop them. "I don't know how to make it right." Sophia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, in a quiet voice, she spoke again, but this time it wasn't filled with anger or disappointment. It was something else, something softer. "It's not about making it right, Victor. It's about being here now, and moving forward." Victor nodded, his heart heavy with the understanding that there was no simple solution, no quick fix. The damage to their marriage, to their relationship, couldn't be undone in an instant. But he had a chance, a small, fragile chance, to be there for his son, to show up in a way he hadn't before, to build something new, something real. "I want to be here," Victor said, the words raw with emotion. "For him, for you. I know I can't change the past, but I'll do everything I can to be part of his life now, to be the father I should have been from the start." Sophia didn't respond immediately, and for a moment Victor wondered if his words were enough. But then, slowly, she nodded, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small spark of hope. Victor leaned closer, his eyes still fixed on Nicholas. "Can I hold him?" he asked softly, his voice tentative. It felt like an absurd question, one he should have asked years ago, but now it was the only thing that seemed to matter. Sophia hesitated, her gaze flickering between Victor and their son. After a long beat, she nodded, carefully placing the baby into Victor's arms. The moment their son was in his grasp, Victor felt his heart skip a beat. The tiny weight, the warmth of his son's body against his chest. It was overwhelming. He could hardly breathe, could hardly think, as he looked down at the child he'd never known, but who was now undeniably his. For a long time, Victor had thought he was in control of everything, but in this moment, holding Nicholas in his arms, he realized that control was an illusion. Life had a way of pulling you into places you never expected to go, making you face truths you'd long buried. And maybe, just maybe, it was time for him to face those truths, to let go of the need for perfection and accept that love, real love, came with mistakes, forgiveness, and the willingness to grow. For the first time in a long time, Victor felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. Victor stood in the hospital room, cradling his son in his arms, but the weight of the moment was far heavier than any physical burden. He could feel the fragility of time, the years that had slipped through his fingers, and the silence that hung in the air between him and Sophia. It was as if they had both been suspended in this delicate moment, trapped by the ghosts of their past and the uncertainty of what the future could hold. He glanced down at Nicholas, the tiny life that now rested in his arms. The baby's soft breath and small, fluttering movements felt like a fragile tether pulling him back to the present, urging him to acknowledge what had been lost and what could still be saved. Victor wanted to say something, anything, to bridge the distance between him and Sophia, to make her believe that he was ready, that he understood. But the words seemed to elude him, tangled in a web of regret, guilt, and uncertainty. Sophia was sitting across from him, her arms folded, watching him carefully, her gaze unreadable. Her face was calm, but Victor could see the trace of something deeper, something he couldn't quite name. He knew that she was still holding back, guarding herself against the hurt and disappointment that had followed their separation. And why wouldn't she? She had been the one left behind, left to pick up the pieces of their broken relationship, left to face the harsh reality of raising their child alone. "How long?" Victor asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, his eyes still fixed on Nicholas. He didn't have to elaborate. Sophia knew what he meant. She sighed softly, her eyes softening as she looked at her son. "He's 3 months old," she said. "I found out about the pregnancy a little while after we separated. It wasn't easy, but I made a decision. I wasn't going to go back to you, Victor. I couldn't. I needed to be strong for him." Victor's chest tightened. 3 months. He had missed 3 precious months of his son's life, months that he would never get back. He couldn't change that. He couldn't undo the choices he had made, but hearing the pain in her voice, seeing the quiet strength in the way she spoke, made him realize just how much he had underestimated her, just how much he had taken her for granted. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I would have—" Sophia held up a hand, cutting him off gently. "Victor," she said, her voice steady but firm, "you weren't there. You didn't want to be, and when I tried to reach out to you, you were too busy. So I made the decision to move forward on my own. I thought I could do it without you, and I did. But I never wanted this kind of life for you, for Nicholas. I didn't want to raise our son without his father." Victor swallowed hard, trying to push past the lump in his throat. He hadn't been there. He knew that. He had been too consumed by his work, by his need for success, to see what truly mattered. Now, in the quiet of the hospital room, he could no longer ignore the painful truth. He had failed her. He had failed them. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, Sophia," he said quietly, his voice raw. "But I want to try. I want to be here for him. I want to make up for everything I missed." Sophia didn't respond immediately. Her eyes flickered to the baby in his arms, a look of contemplation passing across her face. After a long pause, she spoke again, but her words were more measured this time, as if she was carefully weighing her thoughts. "You can't make up for what you missed, Victor," she said slowly, "and I'm not asking you to, but I am asking you to show up now, to be here, for him, for us." Her voice wavered slightly on the last words, and Victor could hear the vulnerability in her tone. "That's all I need from you. If you can do that, then maybe we can figure this out. But it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time." Victor nodded, the weight of her words settling over him like a heavy blanket. Time. He knew she was right. The distance between them couldn't be erased with a few words, a few apologies. It would take much more than that. It would take actions. It would take a willingness to rebuild the trust he had shattered, a trust that could only be restored through consistency and patience. "I'm ready to do whatever it takes," Victor said, his voice quiet but firm. "I want to be a part of his life. I want to be the father I should have been." Sophia's gaze softened, but there was still a trace of caution in her eyes. "I'm not going to make it easy for you, Victor. You've had your chance. This time you have to prove it." Victor understood. He knew this wouldn't be easy. He had broken something that couldn't be fixed in an instant, and he wasn't going to expect miracles. But for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe there was still a way forward. He looked down at Nicholas again, his heart swelling with emotion as he gazed at the tiny face, so innocent and unaware of the complicated web of relationships around him. The baby's small hand reached out, fingers curling around Victor's thumb, and for a brief moment Victor felt something shift inside him. This was his son, and he was going to do everything in his power to be the father he deserved. "I'll be here," Victor promised, his voice unwavering. "I'll prove it. I'm not going anywhere." Sophia didn't say anything more. She simply nodded, her expression unreadable. She wasn't ready to let her guard down completely, but in that moment, Victor could see the smallest crack in the wall she had built around herself. It wasn't much, but it was enough. For now, that was all he needed. The hours passed slowly, and as the sun began to set, casting a soft golden light into the room, Victor and Sophia sat together in silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. The world outside seemed distant, and for once Victor didn't feel the constant pull of his career, the pressure of business deals and deadlines. All that mattered in that moment was here, now, the fragile new life in his arms, and the woman who had once been his world. He didn't know what the future held, didn't know if he would ever be able to repair the deep fractures in their relationship, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. He was ready to fight for this family, ready to put in the work that was needed, no matter how long it took. For the first time in years, Victor felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. The days after Victor's encounter at the hospital were quiet. Quieter than he had expected. There were no grand gestures, no sudden shifts in the world that would signal everything was suddenly right again. Life went on, as it always did. The meetings piled up, the deals continued to roll in, and yet, for the first time in a long time, Victor didn't feel the rush of accomplishment when he closed another successful business transaction. He had spent years chasing after something he thought would make him happy. But now, as he sat in his sleek office with the city stretching out below him, all he could think about was the weight of what he had to rebuild, and how long it would take. It was as if he were staring into an endless horizon, unsure of where the path would lead, but knowing that he had to walk it anyway. Victor's phone buzzed on the desk, pulling him out of his reverie. He glanced at it. An incoming message from Sophia. It had been a week since their last conversation in the hospital room, and he had made it a point to respect her space, giving her the time and distance she had asked for. It was the hardest thing he had done, but he understood now that rushing back into her life was not the answer. She needed to see him change, not just hear about it. Victor hesitated before opening the message. "How about visiting us tomorrow? It's been a while, and I think Nicholas would like to see his father again." He read the message twice. Nicholas would like to see his father again. Those words struck him deeply. Sophia hadn't simply referred to him as the father or Victor, but as his father. It felt like a step toward acceptance, like she was beginning to allow him back into their lives, not just as a visitor, but as someone who could be a permanent part of Nicholas's future. Victor's heart raced with a mix of anticipation and apprehension. What if he wasn't ready? What if he wasn't enough for Nicholas? He had no answers, but he knew this was an opportunity he couldn't afford to waste. It was a fragile step forward, and he had to take it. Slowly, he typed a response. "I'll be there. I want to be a part of his life. I'll do my best." He sent it before he could second-guess himself, immediately feeling a sense of relief mixed with nervousness. The unknown was a heavy burden, but it was one he was willing to carry if it meant reconnecting with his son. The next afternoon, Victor arrived at Sophia's apartment. He had made sure to leave work early, something he hadn't done in years, just to show that he was prioritizing this moment. As he stood in front of the building, he could feel the familiar anxiety settle in the pit of his stomach. It was one thing to feel the desire to change, to understand what he had missed, but it was another to actually step into the unknown. Taking a deep breath, he walked through the front door, the scent of fresh flowers in the air, a soft contrast to the sterile, cold nature of his office. He wasn't sure what he had expected when he entered the space that had once been his home, but the reality of it hit him like a wave. Everything was different now. Sophia was sitting on the couch nursing Nicholas, her face a portrait of calm that he had always admired. It was a quiet scene, one that was both familiar and foreign at the same time. The baby's small face was pressed against her chest, his little hands curling instinctively, and as Victor watched them, the weight of it all pressed in on him. Sophia looked up as he entered, her eyes meeting his with a quiet but guarded expression. There was no anger, no coldness, just a steady gaze that held something deeper, perhaps a cautious hope. "Victor," she said, her voice soft but firm, "I'm glad you came." Victor's heart skipped a beat at her words. Glad. It was a simple word, but in that moment, it felt like everything. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak immediately, as he walked toward the couch and sat down slowly beside her. The baby was still nursing, his small face content and peaceful. Victor watched them both for a long moment, feeling something stir within him, something protective, something raw. He had never thought about being a father. It had always been too distant, too abstract. But now, seeing his son in front of him, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle into his bones, it was real. "Can I hold him?" Victor asked softly, his voice almost a whisper, as though he were afraid of disturbing the delicate moment between mother and child. Sophia hesitated for a moment before nodding, gently lifting Nicholas into Victor's arms. She moved carefully, as though handing him a fragile, precious thing, and Victor couldn't help but marvel at the trust she had in him. There was a tenderness in the way she placed Nicholas in his arms, a gesture that spoke volumes, a quiet acknowledgement that she was allowing him to step into a role he had once abandoned. As Victor held his son for the first time, the weight of the moment felt almost unbearable. The small body, warm and soft against his chest, made him feel both complete and empty at the same time. This was his son, and he had missed so much. He had missed the first cries, the first smiles, the quiet moments of bonding that mothers and fathers shared in the early days of a child's life. And now, here he was, playing catch-up. Sophia watched them quietly, her eyes soft but still cautious. "You've got him," she said softly, her voice steady but full of meaning. But you're going to need to show up, Victor, not just for him, but for me. It's not just about being here now, it's about being here for the long haul. You don't get to pick and choose when it's convenient. Victor nodded, the weight of her words settling on him. I know, he said quietly, his voice raw with the sincerity of the promise. I'm not asking for forgiveness, I'm asking for a chance to prove I can be here, to prove that I can be the father you and Nicholas deserve. For a long moment, there was nothing but the soft sounds of Nicholas's breathing, the quiet hum of the city beyond the walls. The moment stretched, fragile and quiet, as if the world outside had paused, just for them. Finally, Sophia spoke again, her voice softer than before. I want to believe you, Victor, I really do, but it's going to take time. It's going to take effort. It's going to take everything you have, and I'm not going to just hand you back the life we had. You have to show me every day that you want this, that you're willing to work for it. Victor met her gaze, feeling something shift within him. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, moments where he questioned if he was truly capable of what he had promised. But there was one thing he knew for sure. He wasn't going to walk away again. I'll show you, he said, his voice firm but gentle. I'll show you that I'm here, that I'm not going anywhere. I'll prove it, Sophia. I will. Sophia didn't respond immediately, but as she watched him hold their son, she seemed to soften. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something. A crack in the wall she had built around her heart, a crack that, with time, might just be enough for them to begin to rebuild. Victor sat on the edge of his bed, staring at his phone. The digital clock on his nightstand blinked in the stillness, the soft, rhythmic pulse of the numbers marking the passing time. It had been 2 weeks since he had last seen Sophia and Nicholas, and although every part of him wanted to reach out, wanted to rush back and make things right, he knew better than to move too fast. He had learned that much. His phone buzzed in his hand, breaking the quiet. It was a message from Sophia. Can you pick up some groceries for us tomorrow? Nicholas needs a few things. Victor hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to respond. It was a simple request, one that anyone might make of a friend, a neighbor, or a family member. But for him, it felt like a test. This wasn't just about picking up milk and eggs. It was about showing up, being part of their life in a way that wasn't transactional. It wasn't about giving money or throwing around empty promises. It was about being present, doing something small yet meaningful. He typed back quickly. Of course, I'll be there in the morning. The message was short and simple, but it was enough. He set the phone down on the nightstand, looking at the empty space next to him. The weight of the promise hung in the air, but this time it felt different. For once, he wasn't just promising to change. He wasn't just talking about being a better father, a better man. He was actually doing something, and somehow that felt more important than anything else. The next morning, Victor drove to the grocery store, the list Sophia had sent him in hand. The task was straightforward, but his mind was anything but clear. As he walked through the aisles, his thoughts turned inward, reflecting on what he had learned over the past few weeks. It wasn't just about the physical things he could provide, groceries, money, gifts. It was about time. Time was the real gift he had to offer. Time spent with Nicholas. Time spent with Sophia. Time spent showing them that he was present, that he was willing to give up the endless chase for success and focus on what truly mattered. But as simple as the task seemed, he couldn't help but wonder if he was enough. Was it enough to show up? Could time alone heal the rift between him and Sophia? He had so many questions, so many fears. He wasn't sure how to navigate the complicated web of emotions that had been tangled over the years. He picked up a carton of milk, but his hand lingered, a sense of hesitation creeping in. What if this wasn't enough? What if she expected more? What if Nicholas never saw him as a father? He shook his head and moved to the next aisle, trying to silence the thoughts in his head. He had to stop overthinking everything. He had to take it one step at a time. When Victor arrived at Sophia's apartment, it was quiet. The door was cracked open, and he pushed it gently, stepping inside. Sophia was sitting on the couch, her feet up, and Nicholas was lying beside her, kicking his legs in the air, cooing happily. Victor smiled softly at the sight, the small flicker of hope he'd been holding on to growing a little stronger. "I brought the groceries," he said, his voice quieter than usual, as though the simple act of bringing food somehow carried more weight than it should have. Sophia looked up and nodded, gesturing for him to place the bags on the kitchen counter. "Thanks," she said, the word soft, but carrying a weight of its own. She hadn't asked for help in a long time, and though the request had been simple, it wasn't lost on her how important it was. It was another step, another small piece of a larger puzzle that neither of them had quite figured out yet. Victor unpacked the bags, moving slowly, taking his time with each item. He could feel Sophia's gaze on him, and he knew she was watching him just as carefully as he was watching her. There was so much unsaid between them, so many things that could go wrong. But there was also a fragile thread of something, maybe trust, maybe hope, that they were both clinging to. He placed a loaf of bread on the counter and paused, finally turning to face her. "How's he doing?" he asked, his voice low and tentative. Sophia glanced down at Nicholas, who was now reaching for his toy in front of him. "He's good, growing fast. It's hard to believe how much he's changed in just 3 months." Her voice softened as she spoke about their son, and for a moment Victor could see the mother in her more clearly than ever before. The quiet strength, the love that ran so deep it was almost tangible. Victor smiled as he watched Nicholas. There was something magical about the way he seemed to grow so effortlessly, so naturally, while Victor's own life had been a constant struggle to build, to achieve, to control. This was the life he wanted. This was what mattered. "Can I hold him?" Victor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sophia paused for a moment, considering. Then, with a slow nod, she handed Nicholas to him. Victor's arms felt awkward at first, unsure of how to hold the baby, but he adjusted, taking comfort in the warmth and the fragility of this new life. Nicholas looked up at him, his big eyes wide with curiosity, and for a brief moment, everything else disappeared. Victor's chest tightened as he cradled the baby, realizing just how far removed he had been from this kind of intimacy, this kind of connection. The last 3 months had been lost to him, and while he couldn't change that, he could be here now. He could make this moment count. Sophia watched them both in silence, her arms folded across her chest. There was a quiet tension in the room, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the tension of something new beginning, the start of something fragile and uncertain, yet full of potential. The silence wasn't cold. It was simply the space where both of them had to find their footing again. Victor turned to her, still holding Nicholas carefully. "I know I can't make up for everything. I know it's going to take time, but I'm here. I'm going to be here for both of you." Sophia's gaze softened, though there was still caution in her eyes. She nodded, but didn't speak immediately. The words weren't needed, not yet. She could see it in his eyes, the sincerity, the weight of the promise he was making. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't some grand gesture, but it was enough. "It's not going to be easy," she said quietly, her voice calm but firm. "But I'm willing to give you a chance, a real chance. Just don't stop showing up." Victor's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "I won't," he promised. "I won't stop. I'll be here every step of the way." Sophia gave him a small, tentative smile, and for the first time it felt like something real had started to shift. Not everything was fixed. There was still so much work to be done, so many moments to navigate, so many ways he needed to prove himself. But in this moment, Victor realized something that went beyond promises. It was about showing up day by day. It was about being present, about proving with actions, not just words, that he was ready for the responsibility that came with being a father. And for the first time, he felt like he might be able to do it. The weeks stretched on slowly, but with each passing day, Victor began to feel the weight of his new life more deeply. The time he had spent in the past, chasing after success, working late into the night, always striving for more, now felt like a distant memory. The business deals, the board meetings, and the luxury that had once been the core of his identity seemed increasingly hollow in comparison to the quiet, sometimes exhausting, but deeply fulfilling moments with Sophia and Nicholas. Each morning, he woke up with a new sense of purpose. He no longer rushed to the office the moment the clock struck 7. Instead, he would make breakfast for Sophia, help with the small tasks that kept their home running, and spend time with Nicholas, holding him, playing with him, simply being present. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the old habits resurfaced, when the allure of success, of proving he was still someone in the world of business, would gnaw at him, urging him to return to his old life. But every time he felt that pull, he would look at Nicholas, his son, his flesh and blood, and the responsibility he had to be there for him. That was his true measure of success now. Sophia, too, was gradually softening. There were still moments when she withdrew, moments when the old walls would rise up between them. She wasn't ready to fully trust him again, and Victor didn't expect her to be. But with each small act of kindness, with each moment he showed up, he could feel her starting to let him in just a little more. The moments when they shared laughter, when they worked together to care for Nicholas, when they discussed their hopes and dreams for their future. Those moments felt like the rebuilding of something fragile, but real. They were like pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered for so long, but were now slowly being put back together. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Victor held Nicholas in his lap while Sophia read a book. The baby had recently learned to grab at objects, and as Victor held him, Nicholas reached out, tiny hands closing around his fingers. Victor looked at Sophia, his heart swelling with emotion. "I can't believe how much he's growing," he said softly, his voice a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It feels like I've missed so much already." Sophia looked up from her book, her eyes meeting his. There was no bitterness in her gaze anymore, just quiet understanding. "You're here now," she said, her voice gentle. "That's what matters." Victor nodded, but the words hung heavy in his chest. But is it enough? He had missed so much of their son's early life, his first words, his first steps, his first smiles. Could a father ever make up for that? Sophia seemed to sense his thoughts, and she set the book down, walking over to him. She gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "It's not about making up for the time you missed," she said softly. "It's about being here now. That's what counts." Victor closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He had spent so long chasing after things that seemed important, thinking that success could fill the emptiness inside him. But it wasn't until he held Nicholas, until he spent real, quiet time with Sophia, that he realized what truly mattered. This, being present, being part of their lives, was the most important thing he could ever do. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Sophia smiled, a soft but genuine smile. "I believe you." A few weeks later, they went out for a walk in the park. The sky was clear, the air crisp, and the world around them seemed to pause in that beautiful, fleeting moment. Victor pushed the stroller, Sophia walked beside him, and Nicholas cooed contentedly in the stroller, his small hands reaching out to the world around him. As they walked, Sophia spoke of things that were once unspoken, the things that had been buried under the weight of past mistakes. She talked about how hard it had been to raise Nicholas alone, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. She shared the fears she'd had for their future, the uncertainty that had plagued her when Victor had left. But as she spoke, Victor could hear the change in her voice. There was no longer the edge of bitterness, no longer the pain of abandonment. "I'm proud of you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "You're really trying, and I see it. I see you trying to be the father you should have been." Victor stopped for a moment, looking at her. The words meant more than she could know. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll keep trying. I'll never stop." As they continued their walk, hand in hand, Victor finally understood. It wasn't about erasing the past. It wasn't about undoing the mistakes he had made. It was about the present, about choosing to be there every single day for the people who mattered most. He had lost time, but he had also gained something far more valuable, a second chance, and he wasn't going to squander it. As the months passed, Victor continued to show up, to be present. There were still difficult moments, still times when doubt crept in, when he questioned if he was enough. But each time he looked at Nicholas and saw the future, a future that was his to shape. He began to understand what it meant to be a father, not through grand gestures or empty promises, but through small, consistent acts of love. Every time he held Nicholas, every time he helped Sophia with a task, every time they laughed together as a family, it was a step forward. And slowly, the walls between him and Sophia began to fade. They learned to communicate again, to understand each other in ways they hadn't before. They made plans for their future, talking about dreams that had once seemed impossible, dreams of a life that was no longer defined by success or failure, but by love and family. It was not a perfect story. There were no dramatic resolutions or sweeping changes, but it was a story of growth, of redemption, of second chances. And as Victor looked at his son, now a little older, laughing and playing in the yard, he realized that he had found something far greater than any business deal or accolade could ever give him. He had found a family. He had found a future. And that was enough. As Victor held his son, watching him grow and change each day, he realized that the life he had spent years building was nothing compared to the family he now had the chance to nurture. It wasn't going to be easy, and the road ahead was filled with uncertainty, but he was determined to show up every single day. He knew now that love and time were the real measures of success. If you enjoyed Victor's journey of redemption and second chances, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you never miss a story about love, growth, and the power of change. Thank you for being part of this journey. Let's keep building this community together.